Today we're going to be multiplying and dividing complex numbers. Alright, so let's get started with 1. We have 5i plus 2 multiplied with 3 minus I. Alright, so again, as I said in the last video, this is basically as if it was an equation, right? So what we have to do is multiply the first expression with the two other expressions, and then the second expression with the other expressions, right? So yeah, it acts use as if it was an equation, right? So you have to multiply 5i times 3, which is 15i, then 5i times negative I, which becomes negative 5i squared. Then you multiply 2 times 3, which is 6, and 2 times negative I, which is negative 2i, right? So you see it acts just like an equation, right? So now we're gonna add the imaginary numbers together. So 15i minus 2i, that's 13i. Then here we have negative 5i squared, right? So negative 5i squared, right? Do we know what is I squared? We said that I is equal to the square root of negative 1, right? So that means that I squared is the square of the square root of, let me erase this. Okay, so I squared, is the square root of negative 1 squared, right? So that cancels out this and you end up with negative 1, right? So I is equal to the square root of negative 1 and I squared is negative 1. So since we said that I squared is negative 1, that means here it's negative 1 and that becomes positive, right? So over here we have plus 5, right? And then plus 6, and we end up with 13i plus 11, right? Now let's do the second one. So 2, we have 3 plus 3i times I minus 1, right? So again, the same thing. All we have to do is just treat it as if it was an equation, right? So you multiply this 3 with these two expressions, and then this 3i with these two other expressions, right? So you end up with 3i minus 3 plus 3i squared minus 3i, right? So now we add the imaginary numbers together and we end up with 0 imaginary numbers, right? These two get cancelled out, and then we have negative 3 plus 3 times negative 1, right? Because remember we said that I squared was equal to negative 1, right? Since I was equal to the square root of negative 1. Alright, so then this becomes negative 3 minus 3, which is equal to negative 6. Alright, now 3, here we have a division, right? 6 plus 3i divided by 2 minus 2i, 2i. Alright, so again, as I said before, this is just like if it was an equation, right? So let me first write it into a fraction form, right? 6 plus 3i divided by 2 minus 2i, right? Now the trick here is that when we're dealing with fractions, we don't want to have roots in the bottom, right? Just like if we had 2 over a square root of 7, we cannot have roots at the bottom, so we have to look for a way to move this root up, right? So again, here we have to do the same thing, right? We cannot have the I at the bottom because I it's a root, right? So we have to look a way to move it to the top, right? So now The way to move it to the top is to multiply it by 2 plus 2i, alright, and divided by 2 plus 2i. Now let me tell you why. So we're doing this because of this formula. We know that a plus b multiplied by a minus b, that's gonna be equal to a squared minus b squared, right? So that's why we're multiplying by the same numbers. You see that we have the same numbers but different different signs, right? Just like in this formula, we have the same numbers but different signs, all right? So why are we doing this? Because as this formula says, we're going to end up with squared numbers, right? So that means that we're going to end up with I squared at the bottom. That means we're gonna get rid of the roots, all right? So you're gonna see now. So now if we multiply this, we end up with 12 plus 12i plus 6i plus 6i squared, right? And then at the bottom we end up with 2 squared minus 2i squared, right? Remember, because of the formula that I said before, right? So now we simplify this and we end up with 12 plus 18i plus 6 times negative 1, right? Remember that I squared is the same as negative 1. So now we have 12 plus 18i minus 6. So we have 6 plus 18i at the top, right? So at the top we have 6 plus 18i. Now at the bottom we have 4 minus 2i squared, which becomes 2 squared I squared, right? So we have 4 minus 4 times negative 1. So this becomes 4 plus 4, which is 8, right? And at the bottom we have 8, right? And now we can simplify this. This becomes 3 plus 9i divided by 4, right? So now you see we don't have the I at the bottom, right? So that means we're good. Now in number 4 we have 8 minus 3i divided by 2i minus 5. Alright, so yeah, as I said before, it's basically the same thing as an equation, but it has a trick, right? The trick was that we have a root at the bottom, right? So again, I'm gonna write this as a fraction: 8 minus 3i divided by 2i minus 5, right? So again, the thing here is that we have an I at the bottom and we cannot have an I at the bottom because that's a root, alright? So we're gonna move it to the top by applying this formula, right? So let me multiply this with the 2i. We only changed the sign, right? We had a negative sign. Now we are gonna have a positive sign, right? So 2i plus 5 divided by the same thing, 2i plus 5, right? So now we end up with 8 times 2i, that's 16i plus 40 minus 6i squared minus 15i. That's at the top, right? And then at the bottom we're gonna have 2i squared minus 5 squared, right? And now at the top we're gonna have 16i minus 15i, which is just I, plus 40 minus 6 times negative 1, because remember I squared is negative 1, right? And this becomes I plus 46, right? And now at the bottom we have 4i squared minus 25, right? And that becomes, so we said that I squared becomes negative 1, right? Then minus 25, and we end up with I plus 46 divided by, so minus 4 minus 25, that's minus 29. All right, so now and one more step, so and we also don't like the negative number to be at the bottom either, right? So all we have to do is switch it to the top. So minus I plus 16 divided by 29, right? Which is the same as minus I minus 16 over 29, right? Now 5, we have 27i minus 3 divided by 3. So I'm gonna write this in the fraction form, which is 27i minus 3 divided by 3. So now in this case there's no trick, right? Because you see we don't have any I at the bottom. We don't have any I or any negative number or any root, right? So that means we just have to simplify. If we simplify this, we end up with 9i minus 1, right? So you see in this case we didn't have anything else, because again we don't have any I at the bottom. We have to do all the steps we did before because we had the I at the bottom, right? Finally 6, we have 8 minus 7i divided by 2i. Alright, so we're going to transform this into a fraction. We get 8 minus 7i divided by 2i. Right, so now you see how here we have the I at the bottom again. So again, that's the only problem we have, right? We have to look for a way to move this I to the top or to make it disappear, basically. All right, so let's see. We want to disappear the I, so all we have to do is multiply it by another I, right? If we multiply it by another I, that's gonna become I squared and it's gonna disappear. All right, so at the top we're gonna end up with 8i minus 7i squared over 2i squared, right? So now this is the same as 8i minus 7 times negative 1, because I squared is negative 1, right? And then here 2 times negative 1, right? So we have 8i plus 7 divided by negative 2. And again, we also don't like negative numbers at the bottom, so all we have to do is switch it to the top, and we end up with 8i minus 7 divided by 2, right? And you see how we don't have the I at the bottom now. And basically that's what we have to do when we're dealing with divisions between complex numbers. All right, you just get rid of the I at the bottom. All right, and that's all for today. Thank you for watching.